Before today's video, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest videos. If you want to see a case or topic covered by Paranormally Listed, then go to criminallylisted.com and fill out the questionnaire under the Suggest a Case tab. Number 3. Dee Snider, Twisted Sister. Although he plays a larger-than-life tough guy on stage, rocker Dee Snider of Twisted Sister has a soft spot for his family. When he famously testified before Congress in 1985, Snider took time to point out that, quote, "I'm very lucky that I have a wife, Suzette, who I've been going with for 10 years now, who is the most incredible mother." So it's more than understandable that Dee and Suzette used to lean on each other and their 4 children after Suzette's brother, Vinny, was murdered in 2003. Vincent Giargiulio was found lying in a pool of blood at 30th Street and Broadway in Manhattan in August of that year. He had been shot in the face at close range. By many accounts, Giargiulio was a likable, personal, and pleasant fellow who might have fallen in with the wrong crowd. The type of crowd Martin Scorsese makes movies about. As such, witnesses were not forthcoming, and the NYPD detectives were having trouble narrowing in on a suspect. For half a decade, the Snider family waited for justice that would seemingly never come. For her part, Suzette was despondent since her little brother's death. Dee Snider said that she would roam aimlessly around the house, feeling helpless and angry about the murder. She was lost and preoccupied with the fact that no one had been arrested for the cold-blooded cold case in the years since it happened. Then Dee said that shortly after Vinny's death, things started happening around the house. As quoted on the website southernpros.com, Dee tells of picture frames randomly falling off walls. "I'm not talking about 1 or 2 pictures," Dee said. "I'm talking about half a dozen or a dozen at a time." One night, Dee and Suzette returned home to hear the sound of a drum set being played in their son Cody's room. Dee called up to Cody to tell him they were home, but Cody surprised them by walking out of the kitchen. Said Dee, there was nobody else in the house. There was nobody there to play the drums. For his part, Dee Snider scoffed at any kind of paranormal activity being at the root of the weirdness. But Suzette believed it was something else. She believed that Vinny was trying to reach out to her from the afterlife to tell them something important. One night, as Dee related, he and Suzette were watching TV in bed when Suzette suddenly called out for Vinny to show her a sign that he was not resting in peace. They got their answer instantly. "It wasn't a delayed response," said Dee. "It was, 'Vinny, do something with the TV,' and bam, it goes off." In hopes of putting Suzette's mind at ease, Dee hired a psychic to come to their house and give them a reading. Dee Snider's scholarly skepticism was on high as the psychic closed his eyes and scribbled a few words on a piece of paper. "It will all come out in the wash," is all the psychic said that Vinny had told him. But rather than finding comfort in the message, Suzette was incensed. What kind of message was that? Where was the anger and the injustice she knew Vinny must have been feeling? It will all come out of the wash. What did that even mean? Then in 2008, around the 5th anniversary of her brother's murder, Suzette Snider got her answer. On September 4th, 2008, a New York gym owner named Christian Tarantino was arrested for the murder of not only Vincent Giargiulio, but for those of 2 other men 14 years prior. DNA matching had tied Tarantino to the 1994 crime, thanks to an unwashed mask allegedly used at the scene. But the clincher, according to the FBI, was a secret tape recording Vinny had made of Tarantino confessing to the earlier murders. When Vinny tried to blackmail Tarantino with the recording, however, Tarantino took out a contract on Vinny's life. But Vinny's secret tape recording was later mailed to the FBI, anonymously. In 2013, Christian Tarantino was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms in prison for all 3 murders, and according to Dee Snider, Vinny was finally able to rest in peace. "My whole family saw it. We were in the house watching TV, and we heard someone walking down the hall," Dee said. "We look and see a man with dark hair. I go running to the hall, and there's nobody there." Dee and his family all agreed they had just seen Uncle Vinny leave for good. It was the last paranormal experience Dee Snider had with regard to his brother-in-law, but it made him a believer. I realized how ridiculously cynical I was being. I see it now for what it is, proof of a world beyond what we know. Number 2. Bret Michaels, Poison. It was a cold and dreary January in 1984 in the small town of Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. And as he sat on the lumpy couch in his buddy's musty basement, 19-year-old Bret Michaels was at crossroads. One day earlier, Bret had watched as his family buried his paternal grandmother, Marie Hazel. Marie had been more than simply a doted grandmother, however. She had been Bret's hero. When Bret was 6, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Although terrified by the prospect of giving himself daily insulin injections for the rest of his life, Bret could turn to his grandmother, a diabetic herself, who would teach Bret how to not only live with the diagnosis, but thrive in spite of it. So Marie's sudden passing had thrown Bret for a loop. At the funeral, I cried so hard that I could even walk into the room, he recalled. On top of that, Bret's grand plans for rock and roll stardom had gotten stuck in the ice. He found himself constantly broke and struggling to make ends meet. As he sat on the moldering couch, Bret wondered if it was the death of not only his grandmother, but his rock and roll dreams as well. Was he supposed to just give up? Grow content to spend the rest of his life in his tiny town playing weddings and pool halls with his high school band, Paris? And that's when it happened. As Bret told Celebrity Ghost Stories in 2011, I'm telling you right now, there was no rhyme or reason for it, but this ball of energy floated across the room. It crackled and glowed, he said, as it hovered across the basement towards him. But Bret's first response was not to see this glowing orb as a sign from his late grandmother. His first response, instead, was to get out of that basement. It was insane and scared the hell out of me, he said. Only later, while sitting in his frigid car, he didn't turn on the heat because he couldn't afford to waste the gas, did Bret realize that what he'd just experienced might have been the sign he was looking for. That night, Bret went to his band's gig at the Fishing Creek Community Center. After the show, he told the other three he was done. He was going out to Los Angeles, California to follow his dream, and they could come with him or consider this the end of Paris. Two of his bandmates opted out, but Bret's drummer, Richard Ream, decided to go with him. They left, he said, 6 hours later, driving an old ambulance van and carrying $800 in crumpled bills. Once in LA, Bret Michaels started going by his middle name, becoming Bret Michaels, while Richard Ream adopted the stage name Ricky Rocket, and their band, Paris, became Poison. Within a year of coming to California, Bret Michaels was strutting his stuff across stages up and down Hollywood's famed Sunset Strip. A record deal soon followed, which led to a smash hit record, Talk Dirty to Me, and eventual music video immortality on MTV. All within 2 years of that strange experience on his buddy's basement couch. In the early 1990s, Bret was standing on the balcony of his Malibu beach home. The $1 million view that evening included a particularly beautiful sunset over the Pacific Ocean. As he watched the sun go down with his model girlfriend by his side, Bret marveled at how far he had come from Mechanicsburg. He probably wondered what his grandmother would think of all this had she been around to see it. Bret's girlfriend went downstairs into the house as Bret watched the last of the sunset. But as he leaned on the railing, the sun's glow bathing him in an orange light, he felt a pair of arms envelop him from behind. It was a warm feeling, he said later, almost like a friend. Thinking it was his girlfriend, Bret turned around only to come face to face with his grandmother. Then in a blink, she was gone. Bret went on to say that he firmly believes that his grandmother came back to tell him how proud she was of her grandson, and to tell him she was his guardian angel. Said Bret Michaels, maybe, just maybe, what haunted me and scared me in that basement is also what motivated me throughout my life. Number 1. Vince Neil, Motley Crue. In 1969, in a Life magazine article about the budding counterculture, writer Edward Kern coined the phrase sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The term became an anthem call for rock stars, and few people lived up to its ideals more than Motley Crue lead singer Vince Neil. By 1984, at the height of his band's success, Neil was involved in a fatal car crash that claimed the life of fellow rocker Razzle Dingley of the group Hanoi Rocks. Neil walked away from the crash, or perhaps stumbled away. His police at the time said Neil was driving very, very drunk. Yet, despite his laughably light sentence for Dingley's death, Neil didn't take the crash as a sign to clean up. After the crash, Neil's rampant drug and alcohol use, by his own admission, only got worse. Along with those hedonistic ways came the darkness, a heaviness that always seemed to follow him. In the late 1980s, Neil was living in a mansion in Bell Canyon, California, with his second wife, Cherise. The only problem was that the house was haunted, Neil wrote in his 2010 autobiography, Tattoos and Tequila. Aside from the usual spooky stuff, weird sounds, the dog barking at nothing, Neil relates a story that terrified him and Cherise. One night, Cherise was in bed and heard a baby crying in the corner, Neil wrote, which was strange because the couple had no children. 2 children from Neil's previous relationships were, at the time, ages 10 and 4, and didn't live in the house with him. So Cherise was terrified to hear the baby crying, and she didn't want to look in the corner where the sound was coming from. That's when, according to Neil, she felt a hand turn her face towards the direction where the sound was coming from, where the baby was, actually, physically turning her face. Vince and Cherise moved out of the mansion shortly afterward and settled in Malibu. By 1990, Vince Neil was on top of the world. He had just come back from a record-breaking Dr. Feelgood world tour with Tommy Lee and Company. And he was feeling so fulfilled both financially and creatively that he and Cherise decided to start a family. Their daughter, Skylar Neil, was born on March 26, 1991. And though Neil was determined to be a better dad than he had been to his 2 older children, he only ended up doubling down on his sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle. His drinking and drug use escalated. There were affairs with various models, Malibu bar fights, and extended periods of just not coming home to his wife and daughter. Unsurprisingly, he and Cherise soon divorced. A judge gave Neil visitation rights to 3-year-old Skylar, who would visit her dad at his hotel room, and the heaviness continued. The September 1991 release of Nirvana's Nevermind album pretty much sealed the tomb of 80s hair metal bands and kicked off the grunge era. Motley Crue broke up a year later, and Neil and his bandmates entered into protracted lawsuits against one another. Then Neil's plans to put out a solo album weren't coming along as he'd hoped. A new record sold less than 100,000 copies. A record executive's son overdosed in Neil's bathroom. Warner Brothers released Neil from his recording contract. And then Cherise called Neil to tell him even more bad news. The worst news. Skylar's in the hospital, she said. As Vince and Cherise looked over Skylar's hospital bed, they were convinced it was the flu, or her appendix. But the doctors revealed the 4-year-old had a massive tumor in her abdomen, and it burst, sending cancer across her little body. 6 operations failed to save her. As Neil writes, the hurt and pain was more than I could take. I felt like God was punishing me. I know I've done a lot of bad stuff in my life, but why take my little girl? What had she done to anyone? After Skylar's death, Neil found himself on a downward spiral. My drinking got steadily worse, he writes. Plus, I had pills, any kind I could get my hands on. Vince Neil was on a dark train, and the next stop, he admits, was oblivion. Though he tried to clean up with half a dozen stints in various rehabs, his heart simply wasn't in it. I wanted to die, he writes. I felt Skylar was waiting for me, and the only place I wanted to go was to her. Then one night, about 2 years after his daughter's death, Neil says he was passed out in bed when he felt a presence in his room. Something tugged on his bed covers, and he sat bolt upright, despite his sorry state. Though terrified by what had happened, Neil said he knew immediately it was Skylar. I didn't know what was going on, he later said, but it was her. Over the next 2 weeks, Neil felt Skylar's presence with him every day, and her being with him helped clean up his act. Another stint in rehab seemed to stick. In the later 1990s, Motley Crue reunited and Vince got married to his third wife, Heidi Mark. And Neil started a charity called the Skylar Neil Foundation, which has raised millions of dollars for cancer research, while helping furnish hospitals with toys and TVs for children in treatment. Though Neil admits he still struggles with alcohol addiction, he isn't on that hell-bent path towards oblivion anymore. It's kind of funny, he writes, that it takes the death of someone close to you, or some other kind of tragedy, to make you appreciate what you have in life. A life, he says, his daughter's spirit helped to save. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. We also have a podcast about cold cases that were eventually solved called Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. You can find it on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find great podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.